Lisa Neigut is a member of Blockstream's Lightning team, as well as the co-founder at Base58, branded as the world's best Bitcoin education company. In our conversation, we got into exactly what work Lisa is doing on Lightning at Blockstream right now. We discussed Core LN and the trade-offs and differences between some of the different Lightning implementations available today. And we discussed Lightning centralization risks and the work that Lisa is doing in educating Bitcoin developers at Base58. As always, this is a Lightning podcast, so if you're enjoying the show, if you learn something new, the best way that you can let me know is by sending in sats, comments, and questions over the Lightning Network. In the last couple weeks, we passed 500,000 sats. You guys have been sending a lot of comments and questions. We are on our way to 1 million, so thank you for everyone who has supported the show so far. Quick shout out before we get into it. Voltage is today's sponsor. Voltage is the industry standard and next generation provider of Lightning Network infrastructure, and we will have more from Voltage later in the show in the Lightning round. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm excited to have you on the show, but before we get into all the work you're doing at Base58 and Blockstream, I want to step back and understand the first moment that you learned about Bitcoin or that you recognized you wanted to work in Bitcoin.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna be honest, I can't remember the first time I heard about Bitcoin. I I had a friend who was probably like sometime 2014, 2015, who I had like a couple friends during that time period who explained Bitcoin to me and like tell me about proof of work and that sort of thing. I always thought it was like fascinating and kind of a like definitely sort of mind boggling to like understand what they were even talking about, if that makes sense. Because like the first time you hear about proof of work, you're like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean there's computers that like just compute stuff and somehow that earns them money? Like, I don't understand how that works. And like, I mean, I at the time was like doing a lot of software engineering, more on the mobile dev side, but yeah, anyway, so like, and I think at one point I had a friend who had like sent $10 off in an envelope to buy 10 Bitcoins. He had bought them at like $1 each, right? And like, I remember just being like, I remember thinking like, wow, that's really cool. Like, I wish I could do that, but I don't know how to, so I like won't look into it, etc. And then professionally, career wise, I got an opportunity to get hired onto. Basically, I got hired by Cash App in 2017, 2018, and I don't know how familiar you are with like software engineering teams, but usually when you get hired into like a big project, they'll like have a couple teams that are looking for people to work on their projects. And the two projects at Cash App that were happening at the time, one was a big sharding thing, which is like a database thing. So they were working on a big sharding project, so I could go learn how to be a database guru on the sharding team. Or their Bitcoin team was looking for people to work on their Bitcoin backend stuff. And they were like, Lisa, which team do you want to go work on? I was like, well, I'd really like to work on crypto stuff because that sounds awesome and super fun. So that's why I ended up like getting into Bitcoin for real. And I bought my first Bitcoin while working on the Bitcoin team at Cash App, etc. But I had like heard of it like before that. And a friend and I had tried writing like some Ethereum contracts like a few summers before I ended up getting on that team. So
Love it.
yeah.
That's very cool. So talk to me, how did you then transition from Cash App to now working on Lightning at Blockstream?
Yeah, that's actually kind of an interesting story in and of itself. So I started work at Cash App in like probably January, February, I want to say 2018. Yeah, 2018. And part of like, I needed to learn all there is to know about Bitcoin. So I started reading Andreas Antonopoulos' book, Mastering Bitcoin. Started just kind of poking around on the BIPs, etc. And I noticed in one of the, just like Andreas talks about like the block headers, etc. One of the things in the block headers is the time field is only 4 bytes long, which if you know anything about timestamps in like computing, etc. Like, so the Y2K bug that happened years ago, the problem with that is that they had only had 2 digits to show what year it was. So when you hit 1999, when that 2 digits roll over, what do you get? You get 00. Does that mean 1900? All of the systems that existed assumed that meant 1900. They hadn't taken into the fact that like we're now in 2000, right? So the digits rolling off is a problem. Bitcoin has a similar problem and it's timestamped in the block headers, and that there's only space to get up to, I thought it was to 20. So there's like a lot of computers that will have a similar problem to the Y2K bug in 2038. If they've only using 4 bytes, it will roll over and it'll go back to 0. And so if you don't update your system to have more space for what time it is, you're going to be in trouble. Bitcoin, I thought, had the same problem, which would be like, but it turns out because of the way that the bits are recorded, etc., it actually won't happen until 2108 or something like that. So we have a little bit of time before this is like a massive problem for the network, is what I'm saying. But I recognize this as a problem just by reading Andreas's book. I was like, oh, this is like, there's like a bug in Bitcoin. Like, this is a problem that will need to be solved at some point. What if that person who fixed it was me? How would I go about changing this like one field from being 4 bytes to like, usually they double it, they make it 8 bytes long. And then you're basically like covered for the amount of time from now until like the end of human history in hopes, right? Like, so you can basically double the amount of space you use for that number. Anyways, so this became like kind of my like a mini rabbit hole. I could like look through Bitcoin Core, which I never really spent any time with before, and started going through all the BIPs, trying to find BIPs that had changed anything in the block header. Just as a like, okay, like I want to change this thing. I want to change this one field. How do I make that happen for Bitcoin? Like, what would the process be? So part of figuring that out, I started digging through all the BIPs and like found a couple that dealt with the block headers. And then there was one that seemed like it was like pretty well written. And in the BIPs, so BIPs are Bitcoin improvement proposals. They're in this like open GitHub repo. Anyone can go read them. Anyone can write one and propose one. Whether or not it gets accepted is like a whole different question, but the first step is usually writing a BIP. Part of the BIPs have like a pretty standardized format. It's kind of like filling out a form. Like if you go to the DMV, they'll like give you a form and it's like, you know, what's your name? What's your car make? What's its model? Like describe your problem or whatever. Part of the form for a BIP is it lists authors. It gives their name and their email address. So this is like on every BIP. So the one BIP that I found that had like information about how you would change kind of like the block header or touch the block header, there were 3 authors. So I took their emails and I Googled their emails just to see who I was dealing with. One of them was Peter Todd. I found his open timestamps project. I thought that was kind of interesting, but didn't really know what I was looking at either. Because, like, remind you, like, I've just started getting into blockchain stuff. I know some stuff, but not, like, a lot of stuff. I'm, like, still learning a whole bunch of stuff. So, like, that was a little over my head. But I was like, oh, this is cool. And then I think I ended up reading, like, every single, like, citation in the white paper that had anything to do with time. Because I thought that, like, maybe that would help. Anyways. And then... The second person I couldn't find, and the third person was Rusty Russell. So like I found his blog. I thought his blog was really great and really understandable. I was like, this is a person I can ask about this problem, right? So I wrote Rusty an email. I just like took the email that I found in the BIP. I wrote him a whole like, hey, I found this problem. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's like, is anyone working on this? Like, is this worth solving? Like, whatever. And I sent it off to him. And this was all within the first like 30 days of starting to work at Square. Or I guess Block now, the Cash App team. And then meanwhile, like, I'm trying, like, you know, when a company hires you to work on their software projects, they're not hiring you to, like, go work on Bitcoin, really. Like, I got hired to work on Square's Cash App team. Like, the backend is all written, at the time, it was all in Java. I think they've since moved mostly to Kotlin. So it was, like, a big Java application that I'm also supposed to be spending all my work time learning about, right? So rather than like, so I kind of got down this like rabbit hole sort of looking into this. And then at some point it's like, no, I actually have to get stuff done for Cash App. So I will like start spending more of my time working on their software than like poking around in the Bitcoin stuff. Anyways, I like ended up, anyways, I sent this email off. I didn't hear back from Rusty for like months. And then like 4 or 5 months later, he actually went through and read all his emails that he hadn't like looked into, and he found mine. And he's like, oh, this is an interesting question. Like, here, let me like, you know, Peter Willa would know more about this than I would. And so he CC'd Peter Willa. And so then I was like chit-chatting with Peter about this problem and like was like, okay, like we came up with some ideas that might work. And I was like, okay, like let me write some unit tests, etc., and get back to you about this. Of course, I like didn't And I'd like never written C++ code before. Like I've never run Bitcoin Core. Like I'm just like, sure, I'll figure it out. It'll be fine. But in the meantime, Rusty's like, hey, like I work on Lightning, which I had heard about a bit now, having worked on the Cash App team. Like I've been there for a few months now. I've like heard of Lightning. I was like, oh, like that sounds really cool. He's like, we're hiring. Do you want to work on C Lightning full time? And I was like, I don't know any C. I don't know anything about Lightning. I would love to learn. I just started this new job. I'd feel really weird leaving because they just hired me. But you know, it sounds like an interesting problem, and I would be really dumb to say no since you keep asking me to come interview for you. So I will like, yeah, sure, I'll come interview. And so of course I went through the interview process, and they were like, great, we'd like to hire you. So that's how I ended up at Blockstream. It's a little bit of a journey, but yeah.
Love it. And can you talk to me now about like what you're working on now at Blockstream and specifically on the Lightning team?
Yeah, so I work on Lightning, and it used to be called C Lightning. We recently rebranded like 2 days ago. We're now calling ourselves Core Lightning, or CLN for short. So I work on CLN. I am a protocol dev, but the first few years of me working at Blockstream, I was working on this protocol change called calling it like collaborative channel opens. Used to be called dual funding, but basically the idea is that two Lightning nodes can open a channel together, and when they open that channel, both sides can have money in the channel on both sides, which might sound like how you would think that Lightning works, but it doesn't. Currently, most Lightning nodes, when they open channels, only one side has an opportunity to put money into it. So I was working on that for a long time. Then we built out something. Once we had that built, we could build something out called liquidity ads, which is the ability of me to advertise that if you open a channel with me, you can pay me some money and I will put money into the channel on my side. So basically, it's a way that you can pay me to give you inbound liquidity at channel open. Which, like, if you're a vendor or you're trying to like get people to send you money on Lightning, you need a lot of this stuff that we call inbound liquidity. Liquidity ads are a super decentralized way, very low cost. Like the only cost you pay are the person that is like advertising and what their rates are. They tell you how much they're charging for stuff. So yeah, basically built this like liquidity ad, decentralized bulletin board marketplace system for Lightning nodes, and it's open and people use it these days. Recently, since I did all that work on liquidity ad stuff, I thought, oh, it would be really nice to be able to see all the accounting of like how much you've made off of liquidity ad sales, how much you've made on routing fees, how much are you paying on chain fees for each of your channels, etc. So the last few months, recently, I've been working on something a little, not quite protocol related, but a little farther up the stack, so to speak. I've been building an accounting software, like really in-depth bookkeeping software for CLN, C Lightning, used to be formerly known as C Lightning, which was hoping to get it out this release. I think we're going to push it to our next one, so that should hopefully be out sometime this summer. But basically that'll allow you to run your Lightning node and be able to get really good granular details and CSVs, printouts of like, how much money did you make? Where did your money go? Like when the channel closed, who got all the funds? Like when a channel closes, what are all the outputs of that channel like that can happen? Because there's a lot of stuff that can happen that you don't get a lot of visibility into right now. So the system that I've been working on will let you see all of what's happening kind of real time with your channel closes, etc. In addition to like giving you.
Will that just be for Core Lightning, or will that be available
Yeah.
for all implementations?
It's a level we had to like basically, so like a big part of this is like data collection, right? So I had to like I had basically spent a good amount of time adding all this like logging data, very specific like coin movement logging data to Core Lightning. I don't think any of the other implementations have that level of logging available that they make possible. So it would be great. I think this is something that users should demand of every Lightning node. I think that there is some accounting stuff that exists on like LND, and I don't know what Eclair does for accounting, but I'm pretty convinced that ours is going to be really good granularity in terms of like you'll be able to see exactly what the on-chain costs were by each channel and see where those costs are. And like when a channel gets closed unilaterally, it can be very expensive, and you'll be able to see exactly where all that expense went.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'd love to understand more about the Lightning implementation ecosystem right now. And this is coming from someone with very little technical background, so
Okay.
I'd just love like a high level explanation of what the importance is of having all these different implementations and what differentiates them.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So I think for me at least, like one of the most, so some good background context for this, I think, is to understand some of the, I don't know, problems is a right thing, but to understand and sort of like when Lightning was created, we're kind of comparing and contrasting it to the way that like Bitcoin Core was developed, right? So Bitcoin Core, if you wanted to rewrite another implementation, so Bitcoin Core is like written in C++, right? There's a couple other, if you wanted to take Bitcoin Core as an implementation and re-implement it as a, like in a different language in like Rust, for example. So like there's an ongoing project right now to re-implement it in Rust, etc. But in order to do that, you have to reverse engineer a lot of what's inside of Bitcoin Core. So you have to go in and you have to be able to read the code and rewrite what's in the code really correctly. If you get anything wrong, it's possible that you cause like a chain split or like a consensus error, right? Because it's very important that all of the Bitcoin Core nodes do exactly the same thing for like a large part of like the functionality that they cover. So we call that like consensus critical code, right? There's no one who took like exactly what needed to happen and wrote it down in like human readable language, that you could take that human readable language and just like re-implement Bitcoin Core from like these instructions that someone wrote down about how it should work. So when Lightning was created, the people who were redoing Lightning, who were making the Lightning Network happen, were from a bunch of different teams. And they had all seen kind of the difficulty that not having this commonly well understood document that explained like how Bitcoin Core should deal with like different types of transaction things, etc. And decided that they were going to do a couple of things differently. The first is that they were going to write down exactly how the Lightning nodes worked at every level. So everything that a Lightning node does will be written down and documented in like a human readable like document. The other thing that they were going to do differently is that we were going to have different teams, multiple implementations, all implementing the same like written documentation from the start, so that there would never be a point in time when Lightning stuff that a Lightning node does wasn't documented in like a centrally understood like place. And so that makes it, so I think there's a couple of things that this kind of helps with. One is it makes the ecosystem of developers building on Lightning more, I would say dispersed, decentralized. It's way more decentralized process. So if like C Lightning decided to stop working on their Lightning implementation, for example, there would be 2 or 3 other projects still working on Lightning, right? The other thing is that since there's this commonly understood and like well tested and like everyone has like implemented from the same like written instruction set, we call that the specification, just like, or more commonly the spec, right? So it's the spec is like the written instructions of like exactly how these nodes talk to each other. If someone wanted to come along and build a new Lightning implementation, which this actually happened with like LDK, which is the Rust based one, they went through the spec and they re-implemented the spec. It meant they didn't have to go look through C Lightning and reverse engineer all the code in C Lightning, because there's written like recipe of instructions of how to make a node that would talk effort seamlessly with all the other Lightning implementations that already exist. So that's part of the history around like why are there so many implementations, like how do they like work together, etc. The idea is that there's like this common specification that everyone like adheres to and contributes to, and when you create new features for Lightning, you would add them to this like written document so that anyone else could then replicate it on their own without having to talk to you, right?
Right. Now, is this spec list? Is this the bolt?
This is the bolts. Yeah, exactly. So
Got it.
the bolts are pretty different in that regard from the bips. So like we were talking earlier about how I got into Lightning, I mean into Bitcoin, I was saying I had gone to the BIP repo and looked through the bips, right? Those are written very differently because those are written on like a, we would like to change something. Here's a proposal for changing it. Here's how we're going to change it. Here's how the change is going to work. Here's a link to a PR or pull request that changes the actual code. So here's the code changes you would need. Sometimes they include sort of spec level language, but it's not, it's like the style of writing and the purpose of each BIP as a document is very different from the sort of thing that is in the bolts. So like bolts use like spec language, like you must, you should not, you must do this if this sort of. So it's almost like specs are almost like writing code, but in like human readable language, whereas BIPs are very much like essays to some extent.
I see. Now, if you're a node operator today, or if you're a business trying to build on Lightning, how do you make a decision on which implementation you should choose?
Yeah, so I think like, so we can talk about, like, let's talk about implementations. They're all different, right? So every implementation is built by a different team. As far as I know, they're all written in different languages. So there's like one that's written in Go, that's L&D. There's one that's written in C, this is Core Lightning. There's one that's written in Scala, which is async, or the Eclair node. I think it's async. I forget what they call their node, but I think it's just async's node. Then there's, if you wanted to run something in Rust, there's the LDK project, which isn't actually a node. It's just like a bunch of libraries that you can build your own node with. So if you're like a node runner, I think it really depends on what, I think having a bunch of implementations definitely makes it more complicated as someone who wants to work on top of Lightning, because there's just like not a common surface area between them all. So they all speak Lightning, and they all interoperate with each other, but the features set that like we've kind of added on top of that as like an implementation team is all slightly different. So one of the biggest differences between Core Lightning and L&D for a long time, at least in terms of usability, was the fact that if you got a Core Lightning node running, you wouldn't be able to access it remotely very easily. So if you wanted to build a website where you could talk to your Core Lightning node from the website, you would have to like come up with your own solution or download someone else's software. Like there was no like standard way to like talk to a C Lightning node or Core Lightning node from far away. Whereas L&D, which is written in Go, they set out from the very beginning, I think that in one of their very first releases, they always had a way that you could talk to your Lightning node from like a browser or a web app or whatever very easily. So like I think that for a long time was one of the biggest differentiators between what node you were building on top of. I wish I knew what Eclair does on their node. I'm pretty sure they have like a way you can talk to it remotely, unlike us, but I don't know what the difference is. And so I think like that difference, like that basic level difference made it such that like in terms of like the app ecosystem on top of, so we've got like the protocol and the specs and Lightning nodes all talk to each other, and then on top of that you have people building applications that use Lightning as like a thing. Like I guess like Sphinx Chat is like built on top of Lightning, right?
Right.
So the like which implementation you would choose to build on top of, I think for a long time was really influenced by that. And I say like for a long time because like, so we've recognized on the Core Lightning team that this is a problem. And so this release we're gonna, as of this release, there will be a like built-in like way to access your node through the web basically. So as of this release, so everyone who's been waiting to like build on top of Core Lightning is like, great, now there's like a standardized platform. It's not going to change. I'm not going to have to run extra software with my node. I can just use whatever like the official like way of communicating is, because we'll have one. We didn't have one before.
Right. So when you standardize some of these procedures, do you think this leads to maybe a deteriorating network effect for large implementations? Like L&D, I believe right now is a majority of all nodes on the network.
Yeah, that's right.
Is it now less important to have one node, one implementation over another if all the implementations begin to standardize some of these features?
I think so, yeah. I think like once you get the accessibility thing even, I think then you start differentiating on other things that have been built on top of that, so to speak. So like, I think another big part of why like the L&D node is so popular is that they're the one that everyone built into their little, like, so Umbrel, for example, is responsible for a huge percent of new nodes that come online, and they launched L&D only. I don't know why they did that, but that's what they did. And so, like, most people coming online now know about L&D. They know about the L&D tool ecosystem, etc. What was the other one? Like Voltage Cloud, which is a cloud provider, they only offer L&D. So if you want to use tooling to like spin up a bunch of Lightning nodes, etc., unless you're building your own infrastructure, like you're pretty limited to there only being really good tooling for like support for L&D stuff, etc. So I think that's definitely like, at some point it's like you don't really have much choice if those are like, unless you're like buying your own server or whatever and installing it from scratch, etc., and you're like have a lot of knowledge about servers and running that sort of stuff, etc., you're probably going to end up with L&D because all of the packaged up stuff, for the most part, at least the most popular stuff, is all running like L&D, etc. So I think like, I think part of, will people keep running L&D, etc., I think like, if all of the services that offer nodes only offer L&D, like, no, I don't think it's going to matter what features C Lightning adds if all that like the Umbrel set can get access to is the L&D stuff. I understand that Umbrel is like working on making C Lightning an option, which is great, but like until it's an option, it's not really an option, like
Right.
so I don't think it wouldn't matter if like C Lightning was like the bee's knees, etc. Like if you don't have accessibility to the software through these like other services and packages, etc., like, and a clear too, right? Like if you don't have the ability to like easily install that because the things that are selling you nodes don't offer it, then like, yeah, no, it doesn't matter. I think what, like maybe our accounting bookkeeping is like best in class, whatever, and would be really nice for most people running nodes to know like which channels are earning them money and how much it's costing them to like close channels, etc. Like, like as an example, like our bookkeeping feature is like the best in class everywhere, but like unless like you have accessibility to like get access to running a C Lightning node, that's not really, does it, like.
Yeah, it's like if you build a better app store and you try and convince Apple to put it on, it's like they're just not doing it. Like you've got to get them to buy in first.
Right. Yeah. And so I think like Core Lightning at least has a little lagged definitely in like adoption on that tooling layer, right? So like, and like we've gotten feedback from the Voltage Cloud people that they really want that like RPC thing that we're adding this next release. So like that's part of the reason we're adding it. The Umbrel people really want a like backup feature that we haven't added for a long time. Part of the reason we haven't added it is because we don't think it's like a great it's not actually a backup. Like it's called a backup, but it's not actually a backup. It's just like a way of finding people who might have information about your thing. Anyway, so it's like we've been adding, there's some stuff we didn't add because we were like, well, that's a little like gives you some false sense of security that we didn't want people to think that they had that sense of security. So we didn't add the feature that L&D had for the way that they do. Basically, they're called static channel backups. We get a lot of people really like static channel backups because it's an easy way to back up your node, but you're not actually creating a backup. You're not really like backing up your data. You're basically copying a list of people you have channels with, and then in the case you lose all your data, this list of people you had channels with, you just go and tell your node to reconnect to all those people, and then hopefully they close the channel for you and you can recover your funds that way. But that's not actually like a backup, despite the fact that they're called backups. Anyways, people like them though. So part of Umbrel like getting Core Lightning on there, they're like, well, we need static channel backups. And it's like, well, okay, I guess we'll have to add that then, if that's the thing that you guys
Right.
want and are used to having. So,
Interesting. Now, all of the Lightning implementations, or like you have LDK, which is loosely tied to Block.
that's
You
right.
have LND tied to Lightning Labs. You have Core Lightning tied to Blockstream. There's like corporate ties with all these implementations. Are there any incentives for a corporation to promote their implementation over another? Are there any
Oh,
like
yeah.
what's the end game there for the from the corporate standpoint of having a majority share or a growing share of the market?
I mean, so like, I think that the block team, LDK, and our team, well, okay, let's like, hang on, I think that like, it depends on where your money's coming from, I think, to some extent, like where your incentives are, right? So, Lightning Labs and Eclair are the only two teams that have raised venture capital and have sold someone a story about how Lightning is going to change the world in XYZ way, and they're going to be the firm that's doing it, right? So I think that every time you raise VC money, you're telling them a story. So every time you raise money from someone, you are selling them a picture of a future that you're going to build, usually. Especially in like pre-revenue companies, which most Lightning companies were like pre-revenue when they're raising funds, right? So typically when you like go and raise money, you're like selling a narrative of how this is going to like create a new market, right? And how you in that market are going to like dominate, and them giving you them money is going to like get them lots of returns, etc. Right? I like to call this like the motivated capital problem. Like the way that you motivate money, like how do you convince someone to give you money, right? One thing that's really motivating for capital is like the promise of more capital in the future, returns, right? So you promise them that you're gonna give them like returns in some way. A lot of companies in like the DeFi space, issue tokens because that's like how they reward people like investing in their platform. So a lot of like crypto infrastructure projects outside of Bitcoin like sell VCs on the token that they give them. So they give VCs tons of tokens that they can go sell. So the motivation for giving money to these companies is that you get tokens that then there's liquidity later and you can sell the tokens or like whatever governance things, etc. Anyways, so that's probably so like Async and Lightning Labs are both companies that take VC money, which means that there's some narrative that they've like sold companies. I don't know what those aren't public usually. Usually companies are pretty close chested about what they're telling their VCs. But I can imagine that like whatever their incentives are to make sure that the story they told the VCs actually happen, right? Yeah. Whereas like, and to kind of contrast that to like the Blockstream case, and then Spiral is like another good case. So Spiral and our Blockstream projects for a large part were not core to the companies, like at least historically haven't been core to like what the company is making money on. Like Blockstream is a Bitcoin infrastructure project. We invest as a company. We have a huge research team. We probably employ more core Bitcoin devs as an organization than anyone else. Like our belief in our organization like puts a lot of money towards the Bitcoin ecosystem as a whole, and we saw Lightning as being like a really big and important part of the of the Bitcoin ecosystem. So like our company's investment in Lightning has been honestly pretty small because like our team was only 3 people for a very long time. Part of the reason it was small was because like we're not like selling a story to VCs and then hiring a bunch of people and trying to get a bunch of people building out our vision, etc. We're just like working on making the spec better, making sure that like we implement the spec, making sure the spec process works, making sure that there's like kind of a reference implementation, etc. of like everything in the spec that's written in C, etc. So like our focus has been, we've been like add new things to the spec, like improve Lightning from spec driven processes, etc. Like that's been kind of our focus as an organization. Spiral also is like a let's build, let's re-implement the spec. I think they've been like more mobile focused than we have, like on what does Lightning on mobile phones look like. But they're like a non-profit arm of the Block organization. So I think like, you know, they've never gone out and sold a story, I think, to investors, etc. I know they have a product guy Steve Lee, who's great. He's been working really hard and having a lot of conversations with people to try and get more people using LDK, because their corporate strategy, or like, you know, they may not be a direct revenue generator for the organization, but at some point they need to prove like adoption, right? Or like that people are using the stuff that they're building. So I think for like the Spiral team, they really care about being like a reference implementation of sorts in Rust. They don't want to be a full node. If you want to use the LDK, you have to like put all the parts together yourself. So it's like no batteries included. You gotta like, it's not like an out of the box thing you can just set up and run and like have a Lightning node. You like have to know how to put all the parts together. They're hoping to be more of like the developer's Lightning solution. So if you're building like a application that you needs Lightning, you can use LDK to like do that. Anyways, whereas like, yeah, but like, so then like, you know, you get around to like, okay, like Lightning Labs, I think is obviously the one that a lot of people sort of like question their motives on. One, because they have so much market share for part of the reasons we talked about earlier. The other is they are one of the few firms, like the only firm. Well, I shouldn't leave Async out. They always get upset when we forget that they also are like VC funded and doing great things for Lightning out in France. But I think the Lightning Labs team, like, you know, people do really question, like, how are they planning to pay back their VCs? Like, what is the narrative that they as an organization have they been selling, so to speak, to justify people investing in them, etc. Right? I mean, I think a lot of companies for a long time don't make money and don't have plans to, but at some point, you know, like Uber, for example, has been selling the fact that they're going to was worth a lot of money for a long time, even though they're losing a ton of money, right? And part of the way they kept raising VC capital is by saying that they were going to make self-driving cars happen, right? So they were selling like, hey, we're making self-driving cars happen. So they were allowed to go out and lose a lot of money in the taxi cab business and undercut yellow cabs with the thought that the yellow cabs would die out one. So no yellow cabs exist. Now you have to take an Uber, so you become a captive market. And then at some point they were going to like even cut out drivers, right, and use automated driving. I call it automated intelligence as AI because I think artificial isn't true. It's just automated. We've like figured out how to automate intelligence. So like automated drivers. So anyways, so like, you know, that's like the Uber like pitch, right? It's like, we're going to make automated intelligence work on driving, and we're going to like become a semi-monopoly by like getting rid of all the competition, by like just driving the prices down such that everyone uses Ubers and becomes like Uber accustomed. And then once everyone's using Uber, in theory, you can like charge more money, right? There's no alternative.
Right. So
Yeah.
if you were building the Uber of Lightning, and you had gone out and raised all this money, and you had said, you know, hey, we're going to build this implementation, and you were trying to build a monopoly from scratch and trying to become the leading, you know, implementation, what might that look like, and what could some of the negative implications be of, you know, someone taking that approach?
Well, so I think one part of being market dominant is that you don't feel the need to build things everyone else is building. Like the spec process we were talking about at the beginning has really, I think, suffered from the dominance of like labs in the marketplace, because they add features to their node that only other Lightning Labs nodes can use or know about. That doesn't really impact them because most people are running their implementation. So if they ship it and don't write it down and don't put it as part of the spec process and don't make it easy or like documented for anyone else to pick up and re-implement, that kind of becomes like a little bit of a moat, right? Like you don't want to leave the Lightning Labs implementation land because you'll leave this feature that they've built, but no one else can build that feature because it hasn't been added to part of the spec process. So the motivation for collaboration on a shared spec, I think, definitely goes down, because if you can build that walled garden and you can build paid services on top of that walled garden to some extent that you've built, there's really not a lot of downsides to you doing that, right? I think that the Lightning Network would be a lot healthier if we had like 30, if each implementation had like 20 to 30% of all the nodes ran a different implementation and there wasn't a single dominant player. That would be a lot better, I think, in terms of like everyone needing to collaborate to move the network forward together, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
I don't feel like I answered your question about what I would build, but I think that's like,
That was really good color, though. I appreciate that perspective.
yeah.
So do you then worry at all about like centralization? I guess there's a few different ways you can centralize the Lightning network if we're thinking about the network at large here. One could be through like just having a market leader or a dominant market leader in implementations. You could also have just a handful of nodes that have all the activity on the network that are kind of like the hubs of the network.
Yeah.
Do you worry about centralization in any context on the Lightning Network today?
Yeah, I do. I think that that's like, I think that that is a, so centralization, so there's two ways that the centralization works. One is like by type of software people are running, whatever. The other is by like where the capital, new capital is being committed to the network, right? And where that capital gets deployed, to a large extent, really, what do you call it, shapes your ability to receive and send payments, right? So earlier I was talking about the liquidity ads, decentralized marketplace that I have like built or added to C Lightning basically, and someone built a really cool like UI on top of it. There's like a web page where you can go and look at everyone offering liquidity ads and stuff. It's like, you know, totally decentralized. There's no central party. It's built on top of the Lightning protocol such that everyone gets the information about how much inbound you're doing, etc. But if it became really hard for you as a node to get inbound liquidity, like getting inbound liquidity means you convincing another node that has some other party that owns Bitcoin to take that Bitcoin and commit it to your financial purposes, or maybe theirs or whatever. But like, you basically have to like find someone and convince them to like give you inbound capacity such that you can receive Lightning payments. And until you figure out how to do that, you can't transact on Lightning. So we built liquidity ads to try and like make it a spec level thing that everyone could like use the same marketplace to like sell and buy it. Lightning Labs has built a competing product called Pool, which is totally different mechanics. In terms of how you buy it, but solving the same problem where you can like buy inbound stuff. But if you make it such that like the only way that you could buy and find inbound liquidity was through Lightning Labs' Pool thing, which isn't, they haven't written a spec for how to like work with Pool. I don't know of any other Lightning implementation that's tried to make it such that your node, so if you're running a core Lightning node, you can't buy inbound liquidity using the Pool ad stuff, right? Right. If everyone who has capital that they want to deploy onto the Lightning Network is putting it into Pool, that means that you as a Lightning node running any other implementation suddenly can't get access to all these people that are willing to pay you to put capacity, inbound capacity to your node, right? So that becomes in and of itself like a huge moat, right? Which is why the liquidity ads is so important, is because it creates like a open network, openly accessible. There's a specification. Any node can implement the specification and participate in the network. The people at Async it's on their roadmap to add it this year, so that if you're running an Async node, you can participate in this like open billboard system for sourcing liquidity, etc. But if no one's selling liquidity through that market and it's all being sold through Pool, then like as a Lightning node operator, your ability to receive inbound payments is going to be extremely limited, right? So
I see. That's really interesting. What role do you think, when we think about nodes on the network today, I think a lot of them are hobbyists, umbral nodes, like that was a huge driver of node growth this year. What do you think the role of kind of this hobbyist node is over time on the Lightning Network? Do you buy into the idea of personal servers that eventually we get to the point where everyone's running one? Do you think there's only a handful of kind of large institutions running Lightning nodes? What's your perspective on that?
yeah, I think that the like hobbyist running nodes is incredibly huge and incredibly important for the know-how of how Lightning works and how to run Lightning nodes for like the industry as a whole. Like we need all that education that's going on with everyone learning how to like send and receive payments independently. I think without that, we're not gonna get the like step change function in like people accepting Lightning across like mom and pop shops. I think it's like where it's really gonna kind of maybe grassroots level of whatever, and like we're gonna, if we want as many people on Lightning as I think is possible, I think, excuse me, I think having like thousands of people who have run nodes and understand how it works is like the most important thing. It would be if it was just like the exchanges running nodes and it was like kind of this small backbone of like big nodes that like send and receive most payments between each other. Like I think that would be fine, and that would probably achieve some of the goals of like scaling Bitcoin, but I don't think that that would be achieving our decentralization goals as a like ecosystem, right? Like Bitcoiners want things to be decentralized. We want, and part of decentralization with Lightning is because these nodes are so much more work intensive than running a Bitcoin node. To some extent, you just set up a Bitcoin node and it goes, right? Like you don't have to manage a Bitcoin node. You just have to make sure like you update it every 6 months and like whatever. But like actually running and managing a Lightning node is a lot more work. And so I would say that like I don't know what the long-term viability of having those little operators is, but I think that it makes it really, I think it really, like Lightning is the most decentralized layer 2 crypto network that exists today. And like 85% of that, 95% of that is because of all these small hobbyist like operators who are like trying to like earn some extra sats, right? They're like, hey, I can do some work. I can like, I think that like ideally like you'd be able to like set your money into your Lightning node and forget it and it would magically earn you more Bitcoin. That I don't think that's the case at all for good reasons. But I think that like promise, this is the motivated capital thing I was talking about earlier. Like Bitcoiners who hold Bitcoin, at least a bunch of Bitcoin, were motivated to try to do Lightning because they could like earn more Bitcoin with their Bitcoin. It's like a really kind of like compelling story there. And this is why the bookkeeping stuff that I've been working on I think is so important, is because people need good data, I think, in order to understand like where their costs are and is that like actually happening. How can they, like, I think bookkeeping data in the short term might lose us some core Lightning users as they realize how much they're losing to chain fees. But the goal is that in the long term, it will make people much, much smarter about how they deploy their capital and figure out like nicer strategies. And maybe we'll even get like improvements to the Lightning node protocol from people who are now able to see where all their costs are, and they come up with better ways that we can like handle money and costs on Lightning, and like everyone wins, if that makes sense. So like the bookkeeping thing is like a long-term, I've been joking that like this is like an effort to get more people to work on core Lightning because they'll like see that they're losing money and start digging into it and then want to like contribute about patches to core Lightning to make it more cost efficient. That's like
Interesting.
the long-term goal of it. I think I totally don't remember. Oh, you're talking about like the hobbyists, but yeah. So I think the hobbyists are super, super important, and I think that their role is maybe in terms of like massive amount of capital that's being passed around on the network. In the long term, won't be as much. I think that like all of that knowledge and know-how and that like body of community of people who understand Lightning is so important for like our ability to grow this to like a national, international network.
Yeah. Do you have any insight into what form factor like Lightning nodes might take on over time? Like, are they going to be in phones? Are they going to be right now? They're
So
either in clouds or.
there's two projects I'm super excited about. One is one that we're working on at Blockstream. So I mentioned earlier how like for a long time we've been working on like kind of just like having a spec, the best spec node that we could possibly have. We didn't really care if you could connect to it from remote or whatever. That wasn't the point. The point was we would have like the best spec Lightning node for a long time. One of our so Christian Decker, who's worked on Lightning forever and has been in the Bitcoin space since like before Bitcoin existed, basically. Dr. Bitcoin. He's the first PhD in Bitcoin. Fun fact about Christian. Yeah, so he's been around for a long time. He had this incredible idea, and he's been working on it at Blockstream for the last year or two to build this like node infrastructure project called Greenlight. So if we make money on Lightning, it's going to be through renting servers on Greenlight. So our product motive on it, at least in the core Lightning side, is like we want you running Greenlight. But the awesome thing about Greenlight is that it decouples who has the signing keys for Lightning versus who's running that node infrastructure. So the really cool thing about this is you can build really interesting like mobile wallet use cases, or build Lightning node like infrastructure into browsers now, where like, so you still have like your private keys you have to like keep secret, etc. But those live on your wallet, or they live on your phone, or they live in your browser. But all the infrastructure, so running a Lightning node is really quite complicated in terms of like node uptime. Your node has to be up all the time. Someone needs to be making sure that no one's trying to steal your money and your channels. There's a lot of like, you need to be able to get all this like data about what the network looks like so you can send payments. Like backups are really important. Like if you lose your backups, you like lose all your money, which is terrible. But Greenlight, the whole like idea behind Greenlight is that we will build out all of this like enterprise grade infrastructure to manage a lot of those problems for you, help with like channel liquidity, etc. Give you access to like, I don't know, maybe the liquidity ad marketplace so you can buy inbound liquidity for yourself. But we won't actually like touch any of the money, so to speak, because you will own the keys. So I think that's really cool. So this is like kind of like HSM proxy. So that's like hardware signing module will be separated from the actual node. So I think that's one thing I'm really excited about. I think it's going to hopefully make like a certain amount of building on Lightning a lot easier, because some of the management of the complicated part is like abstracted away, and so now you can build more interesting things on top of that because you don't have to manage any of that stuff. The other project that I'm really excited about, so Greenlight is coming hopefully soon. I think we're making an announcement about a new partner sometime in Miami this week. I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about that, but hopefully that's all like really exciting stuff that's coming. The other side of it, the other project that I saw come out lately that I thought was really cool and interesting from a kind of this like community hobbyist side of things that you're talking about is this project called Sensei that got launched recently. It was built using the LDK, which, as I was talking about earlier, is like batteries not included. Like you have to be a dev to use LDK, but it lets you kind of take Lightning stuff and build ideally like new and interesting things with the LDK. This developer, I think is a pseudonym called John Cantrell, launched this thing called Sensei, which is a Lightning node that like you as your community like block person, like block mom or whatever, could run the Lightning node and handle like, you know, like I was saying, there's like a lot of complexity on backups, on like making sure the keys don't get lost, on making sure you have inbound, outbound liquidity for the node so people can actually send and receive payments. Like there's a lot of management that goes around like a Lightning node. The cool thing is Sensei lets you, I think Sensei kind of means like master in Japanese, right? It's like the knowledgeable older like guru. So what it lets you do is run a Lightning node that you can then like, so let's say there's like the Lightning Sensei, and maybe this is someone from like the hobbyist like plebnet, right, who runs this node and then can hand out like mini nodes, like mini accounts off of their Sensei node to people in their family or community or co-op or whatever. So you can have a Lightning like wallet, an account with money in it that's your money, but like I guess both of these are like basically outsourcing the like node infrastructure difficult part to someone else. And Greenlight, in the case of Greenlight, it's to Blockstream with like our, I'm gonna say enterprise grade like software in a cloud somewhere. Whereas Sensei, it's like give it to, you know, John down the street who's going to be your neighborhood Lightning mom and just like manage the node for everyone in their community. So both of these I think are taking like some of the complexity of Lightning and abstracting it away, and I think really interesting and also interesting ways.
That is really interesting. I want to hear your perspective on the different applications that Lightning nodes or even Bitcoin nodes will support over time. Because right now I've started to notice like this personal server movement starting to pick up steam, and now all of a sudden it's like you have this little box in your home or you have a node somewhere else, and it can do more than just Lightning. Like, do you think that this is going to be a foundation upon which we build this Web3 or kind of next generation of the internet? Or what's your perspective on that?
I think that's a great question. I don't have any like amazing insights, I think. I do think like, so like, I think like I think more people being able to run internet infrastructure, whatever that means, from their houses is great. And any kind of like software or project, and like it would make sense to me that digital money would be the one that makes more people do more home computing, right? Because you want management of your own finances, etc. So like, it doesn't surprise me that Lightning is the thing that's making this renewed interest in decentralized home-based computing a thing. I think that it's a little too early to see how sticky that is and how big those communities grow to be. One of my good friends, who's kind of like the internet philosopher, his name is Venkat, he goes by VGR, has been talking a lot about like the great weirding, how like I want to say like maybe the last like 7 years, and I think this decade are going to be like, things are just getting weird. I think the pandemic sort of accelerated it, and weirdness is like, it's almost like mini cults. Like, cult is probably a little bit of a strong word, but like, just like people with like strong interest about weird stuff that you've never heard of, that like you discover that that's like a whole thing, and you're like, what? Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like, why I bring that up is like, I think that like, I'm not sure how much of like the home infrastructure stuff is like, I definitely think it's like part of this great weirding, and that like more things are going to be decentralized. More people, I think there is going to be a larger number of people that run a lot of their personal infrastructure at home, and there's like that is a reasonable thing to expect you'll be able to do. And I think that these companies that are building out projects on top of Lightning nodes are like probably the first wave of that. I don't know how sticky that's going to be, so I'm not really sure how to like calculate that into things, whatever. But yeah, I think it's great, and I think like it's really a no-brainer. I hadn't really thought about it much, but I think that like Lightning nodes have to be like on all the time. So if you're running a hobbyist Lightning node, you need infrastructure that is up all the time. You have like this always on computing like need, and it's based on money, so you have like motivation to make sure that it stays up. So it would like, yeah, like I said, it makes sense to me. So people used to run like websites from their house, but if your website goes down, I mean, it sucks because no one can read your content, like that bad. Maybe you like can't get to your files you had at home and you needed them while you were traveling, like that's awful. But like money being on your computer and you needing access to your money all the time, I think is going to have a huge impact on home-based computing. Like, yeah, 100%. Or maybe like we rediscover clouds, or maybe like local computer clubs pop up, like the Sensei thing. Yeah. And actually like the bookkeeping data, I've been doing some kind of like, the bookkeeping data is going to be the first like data project on C Lightning that you will be able to like, that is kind of Web3 like, because you'll be able to like, I don't know, I'm working with some stuff, but like that's all that accounting data like lives with your node, right? And
right. And so you've
can,
got
like,
this accessible dashboard that you're just pulling from the node.
So like at a hackathon a few weekends ago, I was working with a friend to make a dashboard for it. I don't know if we'll actually finish that project. I have a million things going on, but like, it was so cool to be able to like, and the cool thing about that dashboard project, Kevin, is that I can write the dashboard software and host it on like some global internet cloud computer, whatever. No one cares, right? I can like, and that's like all the like, what does it look like? How does the views look like? What kind of graphs can you see of it, etc. But all the data, all of your accounting data for your node lives on your node, wherever in the world your node is, right? So it's at home. We don't have it. We can create these beautiful graphs that you can log in with your credentials from your node, and then the web page will go directly from, there's this cool stuff that like this guy named Will, he's JB55 on Twitter, has been working on. It's building on top of some work that Rusty did, but it basically lets you like connect to your Lightning node from your browser in this like really quick, great way. So I can get all that data that you're hosting at home. Never has to, like, all of your accounting data you can see beautifully on this app that someone else wrote that's hosted on, like, so like if I'm a Lightning node runner, I just have to run my node, right? I don't have to like set up like any web infrastructure. I don't have to like download any software packages or anything. I can just go to a web page, pop in a little bit of information and some credentials that tell you like how to find my node and gives it some authorization to access that data. And then like all of a sudden I can see all of my data and like I don't have to share it with anyone. Like it's just literally going from whatever web browser I'm on to my node wherever it is in the world.
Yeah. Is that project you're mentioning, is that LN Link?
Yes, it's well LN Link. It's so like LN Link is built on top of the exact same thing. It's like LN Socket is technically like the GitHub project, but yeah. So he has a JavaScript version of it that we were using to build out our accounting dashboard. So you just pop in like a little bit of connection information about how to get your node to your node, which is usually already public, and then you have to do a little bit of setup on your C Lightning node, like a little bit of extra setup to get this like authentication string that I can then pop into the website. So then when the website goes to the website, like it's not my server that hosting the web page, but your like browser talks directly to your Lightning node. It's completely securely. It's using like better like stuff than SSL, which is super cool. Yeah, I don't know. I get super excited about it. Yeah, it's so cool. Yeah, and so like, yeah, I think the Web3 thing is real. I think this accounting data stuff is like I think it's like, you know, it's like the right frontier of like what is the obvious data that your node has that you want to be able to see from anywhere, but like you don't want to share with anyone. Like you don't want anyone to have your payment data.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. You got my head spinning with ideas. Is
Great.
there is there one particular maybe Lightning application or idea that you want to see built that no one's taken a stab at yet?
I think like, so I think people have like taken a stab at it, but like, oh God, my projects are always like a little strange. I don't feel like I'm like a typical, but like, okay, so I think Will Kasserin is building LN Link wallet that you were talking about. I am so freaking excited about that. But mostly because like, I don't really have, I mean, there's some software that you can control your node with like a phone from, but like, I don't install, I'm really bad about installing and running other people's software. So like I haven't done it. So I'm really, 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 really excited about this like iOS app that is going to be like my direct link to my core Lightning node. Like so stoked. I really wish that there was an equivalent thing for browsers, like the browser version, like, you know, MetaMask is like I think MetaMask, like, there's like a version of MetaMask that is like the Lightning MetaMask, and I think like Willow Byrne is,
Albi?
huh?
Is that are you referring to Albi?
No, I haven't checked into Albi.
Oh,
Then
okay.
maybe that's it. But I was gonna say there's like a version of MetaMask that is the Lightning like dashboard, you know, and maybe that's built using LN Socket, and like you can just connect and see all of your stuff from your Lightning node using LN Socket. Maybe it's Albi. I haven't checked that out. It seems really great. I think like the guys who are working on that are awesome, but yeah, I don't know. I think there's like some stuff in like Lightning wallets that doesn't exist quite yet that I think that will make like, and a lot of that is using like Bolt 12 stuff. So I don't know, but yeah, I think like the payment integration with like Bolt 12s and stuff like hasn't been like totally solved yet, and I think that would be great to get done.
Interesting. Okay, I want to make sure we get some time to talk about Base58 and the work you're doing there.
Cool. Oh yeah, that's cool.
It it is no, this is a fascinating conversation. I'm really enjoying this, but I want to make sure we get to it. You're branding this as on your homepage here. It is the world's best Bitcoin education company.
That's right.
I want to learn more about exactly what you're building and what your vision for Bitcoin education is.
Yeah, this is a great question. Okay, so Base58 is, so I think like so like take one step back. So when people talk about Bitcoin education, one thing that like it kind of occurred to me is like a lot of people when they talk about learn about Bitcoin, I think they mean it in a like, I would almost say like liberal arts economists like learn about monetary policy learn about like what sound money is, learn about how Bitcoin lets you hold money for yourself for the first time. Those are all, I think, really important things to learn about, but that's not what I'm talking about when I say Bitcoin education, right? And I think the easy way to kind of like understand the difference there is like almost if you look at like people talk about liberal arts versus STEM education. And there's always the like, well, there's like the liberal arts side, and it's like, is liberal arts worth anything? And then there's like the STEM side, and like learn how to build stuff, etc. I think a lot of people when they say Bitcoin education are talking more about the liberal arts side of it, and like the sound money stuff is like economics side of things, which is like, you know, super important. But that's not what we do at Base 58. Base 58 aims to be the premier institution for learning about the STEM side of Bitcoin education. So if you want to understand how Bitcoin transactions work, like what is a Bitcoin transaction? What does it look like? What goes into it? How do you write them? How do you write, like we go through, so we spend like the second or third week, maybe it's the second week, we get into like, oh man, we talk about all of my favorite things. Like I'll be like, oh, this is my favorite thing, and then I'll like be like, oh, this next week, but this is also my favorite thing. But one of my favorite things that we talk about in class is we talk about script, which is how you write like locks on your Bitcoin. Like how do you make it such that only you can spend that Bitcoin? We talk about how to write those. So you get to see us like put them together piece by piece, like building blockwise. We write our own scripts. We unlock our own scripts. We learn all about like what is a signature? What is a digital signature, right? What does it mean to sign a transaction? Where does crypto come into this? We learn about like the elliptic curve stuff. And I go like, I like to think I'm like a really good educator. I mean, I spent one of my first jobs in high school was like tutoring math. I taught geometry for 8 years. When I was at Square Cash App, I started a little club that we would meet every week and talk about Bitcoin fundamentals as I was learning it and everyone else was. Like, I've been teaching and learning about Bitcoin for like a while now. So Base 58 is like all the stuff I wish someone had told me when I started working on stuff in Lightning. But I'd like to think that we do it. Like, we go super in depth. Like, you learn everything about SegWit. You learn everything there is to know about SegWit. Learn everything there is about, for the most part, about legacy transactions. And we do it in 6 weeks. Hopefully it's super fun. Everyone who took my class, I just finished the first class ever. 10 people. We went through 6 weeks. Everyone was like, this is great. Someone was like, this is the most fun I've had in a class in like forever. Cause like I have a lot of fun talking about all this stuff, and I think that definitely like comes through. But so we aim to be like the place that you can learn. And I don't just teach, I teach you all the parts and how they all go together, but I also like know the story behind them, if that makes sense. So we're not just talking about like stuff where we explain like why is it that way. And I think with hopefully the hope with Base 58 is, one, we can get a lot more people involved in understanding exactly what goes into these transactions and stuff. The hope with that is that once it's not I kind of say it's not a programming class. We don't actually use any programming languages. We're not looking at code. We're looking at data from the blockchain. So the idea is that you take this class and you learn all about how Bitcoin data is structured and how it's put together, with the idea that then if you ever look at any software that's built on top of those data structures, you know enough about the underlying layer of how the data is put together that you can build on top of Bitcoin in whatever language you want, you know? You don't have to know Python or C++ or whatever. You could write it in I don't know, I'm gonna say Darmok or something. That's not even a programming language, but
Right.
but yeah.
You're learning more than just memorizing the steps. You're actually understanding the principles and the reasoning and why you're doing it.
Yeah. And so that's what we teach in Base 58. And the goal is that more people will be able to participate in conversations on the Bitcoin mailing list because they understand what we're talking about. I don't think enough people understand what the covenants thing is. There's a certain part of the class that we talk about that I don't think any other class that I've seen covers it. We covered SIG hashes. and we go into them pretty in depth. We spend like a week on them, and that's because I think they're super important for understanding covenants. Like sig hashes are like these are like the precursor to understanding what a covenant is, you know. So
Right. That's really fascinating. I want to highlight something that I saw on Twitter. I think you got the sponsorship initiative.
oh yeah.
Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the program's 6 weeks and is 2,400 per student, right? And you go through this application process. Can anyone apply? Do you have to have like technical background? What's the?
Yeah, so our class is like open to anyone who wants to sign up and pay me money,
Right.
us money, whatever. Like you can just get in and come hang out. We'll have a great time. It's gonna be super fun. It's yeah, and you pay less. I think it's close to $2,000 if you pay in Bitcoin, FYI.
Okay.
But yeah, but so like I think, and we were talking a little bit about this I think before we were recording. Like running Base58 is something that I do kind of in my spare time. Like I'm full time at Blockstream working on sea lightning stuff. One thing that turns out is like I really love showing up to class and teaching for like an hour and a half, and I can do that a couple times a week, and like I don't have to do a lot of prep work because it's like all material I know really well, and we all do it live. There's no slides or anything. It's all like live watching things get put together. So that's like great. The hard thing it turns out about running a school is like getting people to sign up for the classes. So like it's actually like part of that is like going on shows like this where I talk about it and people hear about it and they get excited and they come show up, but that takes a lot of time. And so me doing this sponsorship thing was an attempt to try and get more people into classes without like me having to spend as much time doing advertising. The whole idea, so the way the sponsorship works, this kind of speaks to some grander ambitions we have with Base58, which is to help like educate people who are developers on Bitcoin and then help them get jobs in Bitcoin. So the whole thing is hopefully we'll be able to sign on some companies that are looking to hire Bitcoin devs and have them pay us a recruiting fee for doing all this education work that we're doing, right? So ideally we'll have vetted, one will have like, I've gotten to interact with you, so I kind of have an opinion about how smart, about like what your skills are, etc. And then you're also paying for all this education that they've just gotten from me. So you have an understanding of like what the base level of their understanding of Bitcoin is, or at least what they've been exposed to. So from a recruiting, the whole pitch is to, if you're looking to hire devs that you want to work on your Bitcoin project, you should come hire someone from Base58 who's gone through our classes, because you will have like, we can like help you figure out who in our like cohort is the right fit for your job, and that they're like pretty knowledgeable about Bitcoin at this point, right? So they can get into your projects faster. So anyways, the idea is that we'll create like basically this recruiting pipeline, and if you sponsor someone through the class, which means pay for them to go to the class, and they get recruited out afterwards, we will double your money. We will pay you back how much you paid for the class, and then pay you back, enough for another seat, so to speak. So the whole idea is this helps us get more people who want to take a class and maybe for whatever reason don't have the money, or don't want to, like, for whatever reason aren't willing to bet on themselves to take the class themselves. I think it gives people who love Bitcoin and want to see more people getting into Bitcoin but don't know how to do that an opportunity to like get involved and participate in this education effort by sponsoring someone, which is really cool. So like we've had a bunch of people like, this is great, like yes, I want more people learning about Bitcoin, I will just pay you the money. And then I've like done some work the last few weeks to try and get like a pipeline going of people that are interested, right? So now I've got candidates that I can like, okay, if you've got money, you want to help educate someone in Bitcoin, like we have people we can like put in class now, so to speak.
Right. That's a really cool idea, because it takes like, it's literally investing in education, and like this like common saying, like you invest in your own education, but people think of that as like, oh, I'm going to read books all day, or I'm going to like go to class or something. And now there's literally like, do you think this becomes an investment class? Like more broadly in education, we could see a time where if you have capital, you can invest it in other people's education and kind of help them get an education and potentially make a return on it if they succeed?
I think a lot of like, so this is like sort of like gets into like education loans, right? Like to some extent that's sort of what an education loan is supposed to be to some extent, right? And like I think you've seen things with like, they call them ISA, which is like you promise that some amount of your money that you make in your next job goes back to the organization that trained you. And so you saw this was like Lambda School, which I think they got renamed. They actually had a lot of trouble. Lambda School like got in a lot of trouble, and they renamed because like I think they had a lot of trouble with this sort of thing. So I don't really like. The thing I like about this is, like, one, like, Base 58 is really not that expensive. Like, it might seem like a lot sticker shock-wise, but, like, when you look at your other education options, like, Base 58 is really not a lot of money. The other thing is that, like, what are they going to say here? Like, I think there's like a direct path from going to Base 58 to getting a job if you have some dev experience already. So I think it's like a lot easier for us to offer that as an investment opportunity. One, because like I think there's a lot of devs out there that want to get into Bitcoin, and we can provide them like some education to get their feet wet and make sure they've got the right orientation into like how it works as a system, and then connect them to companies that want to hire people. I don't know if that's true for like every type of education though, you know? So like while I think it's a great fit for what we're doing at Base 58, I don't know how you scale that. Like, so much of like being a dev, like just from my personal experience, is like on the job training, and like learning stuff on the job, etc. And like it's really hard to know who's gonna be good to hire out of like, I don't know. So yeah.
Right. Okay, I got one more question for you. If you could teach, maybe this is like students learning about Bitcoin. If you could share one lesson with them, or focus on one topic, what would be that primary or kind of like first topic that you teach someone about?
Well, like, okay, about Bitcoin.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
We're talking about like man. So we have a prerequisite class that's like pre-recorded, and I send it to everyone who is gonna come through Base 58. So maybe that's like where it would start, maybe.
Okay.
And it's not Bitcoin related. It's like so incredibly helpful for understanding like computer protocols though. Sounds weird, but this is like almost like basic computer knowledge that like I think more people, well, it sort of depends on what you want to do with computers, but if you want to work on like stuff like Bitcoin is like really important knowledge to have, and that's on encodings and Indianness. Sounds completely strange and crazy and weird, but like I promise you, if you like nail understanding of what encodings are and how like Indianness works with that, because they're really related. It's actually kind of funny. Like I was like, these are the two topics you need to know before you can take Base 58. Like you really need to know these. Like this will make your life in Base 58 like so much easier, because this is 95% of what we do is like encode things in different ways. It's basically like translating them between two different things. Like all we do is translate stuff all day long. But it's also like really good for just understanding a lot of the work that computers do. Anyways, when I like put those two topics up, I was like, okay, you need to know these two things. And then I'm really terrible sometimes. I just sort of like hop into teaching stuff and like get halfway through it and be like, oh wait, I really should have practiced this. But like, so I had these two things I wanted to teach, and then I like started doing this hour and a half like prerequisites, like recording like live for people who signed up for my class, and like by the end of it, I don't know, it just worked out beautifully. It's like one of the most impressive things I think I've ever done in tutoring, and I did it off the seat of my pants or whatever, and it's like I think it's a great explanation of how encodings work and how Indianness works. But yeah, I don't know, that's where I would start. Yeah, I know it's
cool.
not super most exciting thing about like Bitcoin, whatever, but
Now, for anyone who wants to get started, where can they learn more about Base 58, and where can they follow you?
yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm at Nifty NEI, Nifty 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 Nye on Twitter. I tweet all sorts of random shit. So if you want to follow me, be prepared for some weirdness. But if you want to like hang out on Base 58 or like join our class, we're currently still have like spots for our next class, which starts April 11th, which is super soon. You can find us on our website at base58.info, info. We're also on Twitter at base58, and that's 58, just like the two numbers. Base58 BTC is where we are on the internet.
Love it. Thanks so much for taking the time. I really learned a ton. You're great. Like I can tell you're meant for educating, because I learned so much in just the last hour and a half. So I really appreciate all the insight, and hope we can do this again sometime soon.
Great. Same. Thanks, Kevin.
Welcome to the Lightning Round presented by Voltage, the industry standard for Lightning Network infrastructure. Creating layer 2 applications and services on Bitcoin starts with Voltage, where you can spin up nodes, get access to liquidity, optimize your node, and much more. Voltage is leading the way as the next generation platform for Lightning, and if you want to check them out, you can get a free trial at voltage.cloud. Let's get started with the lightning round. 13,161 sats is how much you guys sent in the last 7 days. 12 different supporters, 14 different messages. Real quick, I want to run through the top 5 supporters of the week. Y had 4,548 sats sent in. BTC Rich at 2,156. StemR 42, 1,648 sats. Nile with 1,531 sats, and an anonymous user with 980 sats. We also got in a new comment from Y. Y says, yes, Pierre mentioned the lightning torch at 1 hour and 7 minutes and 15 seconds. That's into episode 33 with Pierre Rochard. And by the way, Y is the one who won the 50,000 sat giveaway from Fountain. And so Y says, I'll gladly sock those 50,000 sats in any direction where they could churn circularly around the Bitcoin economy for a couple of days. I think this is something we're going to see a lot more of in the Bitcoin economy, people sending and receiving money over Lightning, and I think the money's just going to continue to move faster and faster. One of the examples that I look to right now is Stacker News, where that money seems to be churning right through the ecosystem really, really quickly. Someone makes a post and they earn some sats, and then they use those sats to upvote another post, and then that new person gets some sats, and they use those sats to upvote another post. It's money moving really, really quickly through that system. And I think we're going to see more of that from other Lightning apps in the near future. That's all for the comments and questions in the last couple days. Thank you guys for sending in sats, comments, questions. As always, can't wait to see what you guys send in this week, and I will see you in a few more days.